I was teaching my 12-year-old son Blake how to change a tire in our driveway when 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt outside our house. My 17-year-old daughter Ivy was inside doing homework, completely unaware of the nightmare about to unfold. Dominic Kane and his crew kicked down our front door, dragged her screaming onto our living room floor, and committed the most horrific act imaginable while forcing Blake to watch every second. "This is what happens when you don't pay protection money in our neighborhood," Kane laughed as his men held me at gunpoint. "Your boy's gonna remember this lesson forever." But as I watched my daughter's innocence destroyed and my son's childhood shattered, Kane made the fatal mistake of his worthless life. He had no clue he just violated the family of Adrian Cross, the Navy SEAL they call the Angel of Death, a man who spent 15 years turning enemy combatants into cautionary tales. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your location. 6 months before that nightmare, life was perfect. My name is Adrian Cross, and I thought I had it all figured out. After 15 years as a Navy SEAL instructor, training the deadliest soldiers on the planet, I'd finally retired to be the father my kids deserved. My wife Brooke and I had moved to what we thought was a quiet neighborhood in Denver, away from the chaos of military bases and overseas deployments. "Dad, you're burning the pancakes again." Ivy laughed from the kitchen table that Sunday morning, her long brown hair catching the sunlight streaming through our windows. She was 17, beautiful, and had her mother's kind eyes. Honor student, volleyball team captain, the kind of daughter who still hugged me goodbye every morning before school. "Your father's still adjusting to civilian cooking," Brooke teased, sliding past me to flip the pancakes. Even after 18 years of marriage, she still made my heart skip. In the military, everything comes pre-made or burnt to a crisp. Blake looked up from his comic book, grinning. At least Dad's pancakes don't explode like his army stories. At 12, he was all elbows and knees, but sharp as a tack. He worshipped everything military, always begging for stories about my deployments. "Navy stories," I corrected, ruffling his hair. "And they weren't that explosive. Tell that to the Taliban." I thought to myself, but I kept that darkness locked away. My family didn't need to know about the 23 confirmed kills, the interrogations, or why other SEALs whispered my name like a prayer. They knew Adrian Cross the father, not Adrian Cross the weapon. Those Sunday mornings were sacred to me. No alarms, no briefings, no life or death decisions. Just pancakes, terrible jokes, and the sound of my children's laughter filling our home. Brooke would read the newspaper while Ivy practiced her Spanish homework out loud. Blake would build elaborate Lego fortresses on the floor, explaining each tactical advantage with surprising accuracy. "Dad, when I turn 18, can I try out for the SEALs?" Blake asked one morning, his young face serious. "You've got 6 years to think about it, son. Focus on being a kid first." But I was proud. The discipline, the strategic thinking, the physical fitness, it was all there in both my children. They had their mother's compassion, but my determination. In a different world, they could have been warriors. Instead, they were just innocent kids in a neighborhood I'd carefully chosen for its low crime rates and excellent schools. I'd done my research. No gang activity, community watch programs, family-friendly restaurants within walking distance. I thought my military paranoia was finally paying off for something good. The warning signs were there, but I missed them. New faces in the neighborhood. Cars that drove by our house too slowly. Blake mentioning that some older kids at school were asking about where we lived, what my job was. I dismissed it as normal curiosity about the new military family. Some kid named Felix asked if you still had your guns. Blake mentioned casually one evening while we threw a football in the backyard. "What did you tell him?" "That you probably did, but they're locked away." That's what Mom always says when people ask. I made a mental note to have another conversation with both kids about operational security, but I didn't press the issue. This was civilian life. Normal problems, normal concerns. 3 weeks before the attack, Brooke noticed a man watching our house from across the street. Adrian, there's someone in that blue sedan. He's been there for 20 minutes. I looked through the curtains. Mid-20s, Hispanic, wearing a tank top that showed off prison tattoos. He was studying our house like he was mapping it. Probably just lost, I told her, but my instincts were screaming otherwise. When I stepped outside to get a better look, the car drove away. That night, I did something I hadn't done since retiring. I cleaned my Sig Sauer P226 and placed it in my nightstand. Just in case. You're getting paranoid, Brooke said, watching me check the locks for the third time. Better paranoid than sorry. But I was already too late. While I was playing civilian dad, professional killers were studying my family's routines. They knew Brooke worked late on Tuesdays. They knew Ivy had volleyball practice until 5. They knew Blake walked home from school alone on Wednesdays. They knew everything about us, and I knew nothing about them. The last normal conversation I had with my daughter was about her plans for prom. She'd found a dress, silver and elegant, and she was nervous about asking this boy named Quentin to be her date. What if he says no, Dad? Then he's an idiot, and you're better off without him. She laughed and hugged me, her head fitting perfectly against my shoulder like it had since she was little. Love you, Dad. Love you too, Princess. I had no idea it would be the last time I'd hear her laugh for months. The attack came on a Wednesday evening when everything should have been normal. I was in the garage organizing my tools, thinking about the weekend camping trip we'd planned. Blake was supposed to be at his friend Mason's house working on a science project. Ivy was upstairs in her room, video chatting with her friend Paige about some drama at school. Brooke had called 20 minutes earlier to say she'd be late. Another emergency at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. Order pizza for dinner, she'd said. I love you. Those were the last words she'd speak to me before our world ended. I heard the first SUV's engine before I saw it. My military training kicked in automatically. Wrong sound, wrong time, wrong speed for our quiet neighborhood. When I looked up from my workbench, 3 black Escalades were pulling up to our house like a coordinated assault. Ivy, I shouted toward the house, but it was already too late. The front door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. I could hear my daughter screaming from upstairs as heavy boots pounded through our home. By the time I reached the side door of the garage, 4 men in gang colors were dragging her down the stairs in her pajamas. Dad, Dad. Her voice cracked with terror I'd never heard before. That's when I saw him, Dominic Kane. 6'4", covered in tattoos, with dead shark eyes that showed no soul behind them. He was the kind of predator I'd hunted in dark corners of the world, but this time he was in my living room, holding my daughter. Adrian Cross. He said my name like he'd been practicing it. The famous Navy SEAL. Heard you were real tough overseas. I had my hands raised, 3 pistols trained on my chest, calculating angles and distances. In Afghanistan, I could have disabled all 4 men in under 10 seconds. But this wasn't Afghanistan. One wrong move, and Ivy would pay the price. Let her go. Whatever you want, we can work it out. Kane laughed, a sound like broken glass. What I want is for you to understand your place in my neighborhood. See, your pretty little family moved into territory that belongs to the Serpent Kings. And you never paid your respect. I don't know what you're talking about. We just moved here 6 months ago. Exactly. 6 months of living free in my district without paying protection money. That's 6 months of disrespect I can't let slide. That's when I noticed Blake. My 12-year-old son was standing in the corner, frozen with terror, still wearing his backpack. He'd come home early and walked right into hell. Blake, close your eyes, I said as calmly as I could manage. No, Kane snarled. The boy watches. He needs to learn what happens when Daddy doesn't follow the rules. What happened next will haunt me until the day I die. Kane threw my 17-year-old daughter onto our coffee table like she was a piece of meat. The glass top shattered under her weight, cutting her arms and back. She was crying, begging, looking at me with eyes that still believed her father could save her. Please, I said, my voice breaking. She's just a kid. Take me instead. This isn't about you anymore, Cross. This is about sending a message to the whole neighborhood. Two of his men grabbed my arms while the third kept his gun pointed at Blake. I could have broken free. 15 years of combat training doesn't disappear overnight. But any move I made would get my son killed. So I watched. I watched as this monster destroyed my daughter's innocence while she screamed for me to help her. I watched my 12-year-old son's childhood die in real time as Cain forced him to witness every horrific second. Look at Daddy, Cain taunted Ivy during the assault. Look how weak he is. Can't even protect his own little girl. The whole nightmare lasted 14 minutes. I know because I counted every second, memorizing every face, every tattoo, every word. The military had trained me to gather intelligence even under extreme duress, and my mind was recording everything for the reckoning that would come. When it was over, Cain stood up and straightened his clothes like he'd just finished a business meeting. Protection money is $5,000 a month, he said casually. First payment is due Friday, or we come back for the boy next time. He walked over to Blake, who was curled up in the corner, sobbing silently. You remember this, kid. Remember what happens when your family doesn't respect the Serpent Kings. Then he looked at me with those dead eyes. And Cross, I know all about your military background. Very impressive, but you're not in Afghanistan anymore. This is my war zone now, and I make the rules. Try anything heroic, and I'll make what happened tonight look like a picnic. They left as quickly as they'd come, their engines fading into the distance. I rushed to Ivy first, wrapping her in a blanket and checking her injuries. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak, just stared at the ceiling with empty eyes. Blake was hyperventilating in the corner. When I tried to touch him, he flinched away like I was another threat. I'm sorry, I whispered to both of them. I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry wouldn't undo what they'd witnessed. Sorry wouldn't give Ivy back her sense of safety or Blake his innocence. When Brooke got home an hour later, she found all three of us sitting in our destroyed living room. Ivy was catatonic. Blake wouldn't stop shaking, and I was staring at the blood on our broken coffee table, making a list. Dominic Cain had made the biggest mistake of his pathetic life. He thought he was dealing with some retired soldier playing house in the suburbs. He had no idea he'd just declared war on the angel of death. The hospital was a blur of sterile lights and whispered conversations. Ivy hadn't spoken a word in 18 hours. She just lay in the examination bed, staring at nothing while doctors documented every injury, every violation. Brooke held her hand and cried silently. Blake sat in the corner, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still flinching every time a door opened. Detective Morgan Hayes was a 20-year veteran who'd seen every kind of evil Denver had to offer. She sat across from me in the family waiting room, her notebook ready, but her eyes told me she already knew how this would end. Mr. Cross, I need you to understand the reality of the situation. Dominic Cain runs the Serpent Kings, and he owns half the city through fear and corruption. Even if we arrest him, he'll be out in 24 hours on bail. Then he'll come after your family again. So what are you telling me? I'm telling you that the system failed your daughter. The best I can do is recommend witness protection, but that means starting over completely. New identities, new lives, thousands of miles from here. I looked through the window at Ivy, my brave, beautiful daughter who used to light up every room she entered. Now she was hollow, broken, afraid of her own shadow. What would it take to make a case stick? Detective Hayes closed her notebook. A miracle. Cain's got judges in his pocket, witnesses who disappear, evidence that vanishes. The last family who tried to press charges against him, their house burned down 3 days before trial. They moved to Oregon. That night, I sat beside Ivy's hospital bed while she slept fitfully. Brooke had taken Blake home to pack some clothes. We couldn't stay in that house anymore. The image of what happened in our living room would haunt those walls forever. Around midnight, Ivy finally spoke. Daddy. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, Princess. He said if we told anyone, he'd come back and do worse things to Blake. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Even after what she'd endured, she was still trying to protect her little brother. Nobody's going to hurt Blake. Or you. Ever again. But you couldn't stop him before. The words cut deeper than any knife wound I'd taken in combat. He was right. You just watched. I wanted to explain that I had no choice, that any move would have gotten both of them killed. But she was 17 and traumatized, and logic couldn't compete with the image of her father standing helpless while she was destroyed. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. She turned away from me then, and I knew our relationship might never recover. The father she'd looked up to her entire life had failed when she needed him most. The next morning, while Brooke was handling discharge paperwork, I called my old commanding officer, Colonel Nathaniel Ryder. He was the only person who knew the full extent of what I'd done in the service and what I was capable of when the gloves came off. Cross. Jesus, I heard what happened through channels. How's your family? Destroyed. What do you need? Information. Off the books. There was a long pause. Ryder knew that tone. He'd heard it before, usually right before entire terrorist cells vanished from the face of the earth. Adrian, whatever you're thinking, I'm not thinking anything yet. I just need to know what I'm dealing with. Within 6 hours, I had a complete dossier on Dominic Kane and the Serpent Kings delivered through encrypted channels. What I read made my blood run cold. Kane wasn't just a local gang leader. He was a psychopath who'd built his reputation on sexual violence against families who crossed him. The attack on my daughter wasn't random or about protection money. It was his signature move. His calling card. In the past 3 years, he'd assaulted 11 women and girls, always in front of family members, always with the same threats about keeping quiet. The youngest victim was 14. None of them had ever spoken to police. He had 17 men in his crew, all with records for violent crimes. 3 were registered sex offenders. 2 had murder charges that mysteriously disappeared when witnesses vanished. But the file also contained something else, detailed surveillance photos of Kane's operation. Safe houses, meeting locations, daily routines. My old unit had been tracking him as part of a larger investigation into cartel connections. Most importantly, I learned that Kane lived alone in a fortified compound outside the city. No family, no wife, no children. Just him and his paranoia, surrounded by security cameras and armed guards. When Brooke and I finally talked alone, she was barely holding it together. The therapist says Ivy won't speak to anyone but you, she said. She trusts you to keep her safe, even though I failed. You didn't fail. You were outnumbered, and they had guns on our children. Any father would have done the same thing. But I could see it in her eyes, too, the same doubt that was eating away at Ivy. Her husband, the decorated Navy SEAL, had stood by helplessly while animals destroyed their daughter. The detective called. Brooke continued. She says Kane's crew has been asking around the neighborhood about us. They're not done. Then we leave. Tonight. Pack everything we can carry and disappear. And run for the rest of our lives? What kind of life is that for the kids? She was right. Blake would grow up looking over his shoulder, and Ivy would never feel safe anywhere. We'd be prisoners of fear, exactly what Kane wanted. That evening, I found Blake in our hotel room, staring out the window. Dad, are the bad men coming back? Not here. We're safe. But they could find us, right? They found us before. I knelt down beside him, seeing my own fear reflected in his 12-year-old eyes. Blake, I want you to know that what you saw, that wasn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. Why didn't you fight them? In your war stories, you always fight the bad guys. How do you explain to a child that sometimes even trained killers have to choose between bad and worse? That sometimes protecting one person means failing another? Sometimes the best warriors know when not to fight. If I had fought them, they might have hurt you too. But they hurt Ivy anyway. Yes, and I'm going to make sure that never happens to anyone again. Something in my voice must have changed, because Blake looked at me with new understanding. Are you going to use your soldier skills? I should have lied. I should have talked about justice and police and doing things the right way. Instead, I looked into my son's eyes and saw that he needed to know his father wasn't really helpless. Sometimes soldiers have to do things that can't be talked about. Do you understand? Blake nodded solemnly. Will you teach me someday? When you're older. When you're ready. As I tucked him into bed that night, I made a decision that would change everything. The system had failed my family. The police couldn't touch Kane. Running would only delay the inevitable. But Adrian Cross, the father, was done playing by civilian rules. It was time to wake up the angel of death. 3 days after leaving the hospital, I made a decision that would have horrified the man I used to be. While Brooke took the kids to her sister's house in Colorado Springs, I drove back to our destroyed home alone. Not to pack belongings or assess damage, but to retrieve something I'd hoped never to use again. Hidden behind a false wall in our basement was a go bag I'd prepared years ago, the kind every special operations soldier keeps, even in retirement. Inside were items that didn't officially exist. Untraceable communication devices, emergency cash, fake identification documents, and most importantly, a secure satellite phone with direct access to off-the-books military contractors. The first call I made was to Victor Steele, a former Delta Force operator who now ran security consulting for clients who needed problems to disappear quietly. We'd worked together in Syria, where he'd earned the nickname, the Eraser, for his ability to eliminate targets without leaving forensic evidence. Cross. Holy shit, I heard about your family. I'm sorry, brother. I need equipment. The kind that can't be traced back to me. Adrian, think about what you're saying. You've got a wife and kids who need their father, not a ghost. My kids need to know that monsters have consequences. Right now, they think their father is weak. There was a long pause. Victor understood the psychology of broken children. His own daughter had been murdered by cartel sicarios in Mexico. What kind of equipment? Within 48 hours, a storage unit in downtown Denver was stocked with everything I needed. Night vision equipment, suppressed weapons, tactical gear, surveillance devices, and specialized tools for extracting information from uncooperative subjects. All of it military grade, all of it untraceable. But weapons were just the beginning. The real preparation was intelligence gathering. Using skills I'd perfected hunting high-value targets in Afghanistan, I began mapping Kane's entire operation. His daily routines, security protocols, known associates, financial operations, and most importantly, his psychological profile. Kane was a creature of habit, which would be his downfall. Every Tuesday, he met with his lieutenants at a strip club called Paradise Found that he owned through shell companies. Every Thursday, he collected protection money personally from his highest-paying clients. Every weekend, he visited his elderly mother at a nursing home on the south side of town. The nursing home visits were particularly interesting. For 2 hours every Saturday, this monster who terrorized families became a devoted son, bringing flowers and reading to an 83-year-old woman with dementia. It was the only time he traveled without bodyguards, the only moment when he allowed himself to be vulnerable. I spent weeks studying him through high-powered scopes, learning his patterns like I was preparing to eliminate a terrorist cell leader. Because that's exactly what I was doing. The psychological profile was equally important. Kane was a narcissist who craved fear and respect in equal measure. He surrounded himself with yes-men and eliminated anyone who showed independence. His attacks on families weren't random violence. They were carefully choreographed performances designed to break spirits and ensure absolute submission. But narcissists have a fatal flaw. They believe their own mythology. Kane thought he was untouchable because he'd never faced a real predator. Street thugs and terrified civilians had convinced him he was apex. He had no idea what it meant to be hunted by someone who'd killed professional soldiers in their sleep. During this preparation phase, I maintained contact with my family through encrypted messages. Ivy was seeing a trauma counselor, but still wasn't speaking much. Blake was having nightmares and asking when we could go home. Brooke was holding everything together with superhuman strength, but I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. The kids are asking about you. she said during one of our brief calls. They want to know when you're coming to Colorado Springs. Soon. I'm just handling some details with the insurance company. It was a lie, but she didn't press. Brooke knew me well enough to recognize when I was operating in classified territory. She'd learned during our military years that some questions didn't have answers she wanted to hear. The breakthrough came during my third week of surveillance. While watching Kane's strip club through night vision equipment, I noticed something that changed everything. A young girl who couldn't have been more than 16, clearly drugged and barely conscious, being led into a private room by one of Kane's lieutenants. This wasn't just a gang dealing drugs and extorting businesses. This was a human trafficking operation using sexual violence to control the community. The attack on my family was just standard operating procedure for these animals. That night, I broke into the club's computer system and downloaded their financial records, client lists, and security footage. What I found made me physically sick. Dozens of victims, some younger than Ivy, all trapped in Kane's web of violence and exploitation. I realized then that this wasn't just about revenge for my family anymore. This was about preventing Kane from destroying other fathers' daughters, other mothers' sons. The angel of death wasn't coming back for personal vendetta. He was coming to clean up a cancer that had been growing in my city for too long. The final piece of preparation was the most important: psychological readiness. I spent hours each day in meditation and tactical planning, preparing my mind for what was coming. Because once I crossed this line, there would be no going back to civilian life. In the special operations community, we have a saying: violence of action overcomes superior numbers. It means that sudden, overwhelming force applied at the right moment can defeat any enemy, regardless of their advantages. Kane had numbers, money, political connections, and home field advantage. But he didn't have training, discipline, or the focused rage of a father whose family had been violated. Most importantly, he didn't know I was coming. On a cold Thursday morning, I made my final preparations. I sent Brooke a message telling her I loved her and would see her soon. I recorded video messages for both kids, explaining that sometimes good men have to do dark things to protect innocent people. Then I loaded my weapons, put on my tactical gear, and became someone I'd hoped never to be again. The hunt was about to begin, and Dominic Kane had no idea that death was already watching him through a rifle scope. The first one died on a Tuesday night outside a downtown poker game. Felix Morales, Kane's lieutenant who'd held the gun to Blake's head while his boss destroyed my daughter. I'd been watching him for 6 days, learning his patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. Felix thought he was smart, parking 3 blocks away from the illegal gambling den and walking through back alleys to avoid police surveillance. What he didn't know was that someone far more dangerous was tracking his every move through military-grade night vision equipment. I caught him in a narrow alley between 2 abandoned warehouses, a place where screams wouldn't carry and bodies could lie undiscovered for days. He was checking his phone, probably texting about the night's winnings, when I emerged from the shadows like death itself. "Felix Morales," I said quietly. He spun around, reaching for the pistol tucked in his waistband. But 15 years of special operations training made me faster than his street reflexes. My tactical knife went between his ribs before his weapon cleared leather, puncturing his lung and dropping him to his knees. "You remember me?" I asked, crouching down to his level as he gasped for air. "Adrian Cross, the father you helped destroy 3 weeks ago." Recognition flickered in his dying eyes, followed by something I hadn't seen the night they attacked my family: fear. The seal," he wheezed, blood frothing at his lips. "That's right. And now you're going to tell me everything about Kane's operation. Locations, schedules, security protocols. Everything." Felix tried to spit at me, but only managed to cough up more blood. "Go to hell." I pressed the blade deeper, and his scream echoed off the alley walls. "Hell is exactly where you're going. The only question is how long it takes to get there." What happened next would have horrified my family, but it was necessary. In Afghanistan, I'd learned that even the hardest terrorists would break if you applied the right pressure to the right places. Felix lasted 11 minutes before he told me everything I needed to know. When it was over, I arranged his body to look like a robbery gone wrong. Street clothes disheveled, wallet missing, cell phone smashed. Just another casualty of urban violence that wouldn't rate more than 3 paragraphs in the local newspaper. The second target was harder to reach. Marcus Rivera ran Kane's drug distribution network from a fortified apartment complex in the projects. 3 armed guards, security cameras, steel doors. It looked impregnable to ordinary criminals. But it wasn't designed to stop someone with military demolitions training. I spent 2 days studying the building's electrical grid, water systems, and structural weak points. The breakthrough came when I realized the complex shared a heating system with the neighboring building, which had been abandoned after a fire 6 months earlier. At 3 in the morning on a Friday, I entered through the abandoned building's basement and followed the heating ducts into Rivera's stronghold. Emerging through a bathroom vent was like something out of a movie, except this was real and the stakes were life or death. Rivera was counting money at his kitchen table, protected by reinforcements that couldn't stop an enemy who was already inside their perimeter. I disabled his guards with tranquilizer darts, military-grade compounds that would leave them unconscious but alive. They were criminals, but they hadn't personally violated my family. Rivera, however, had been in our living room. He'd laughed while Ivy screamed. "Sweet dreams," I whispered as the dart found his neck. When he woke up 6 hours later, he was zip-tied to a chair in the abandoned building's basement, facing a man in tactical gear whose face was hidden behind night vision goggles. "Marcus Rivera," I said, my voice electronically distorted through a vocal modulator. "You were at 1247 Maple Street 3 weeks ago. You held my son at gunpoint while your boss raped my daughter." His eyes widened as he recognized the address. "Oh shit. Oh fuck. You're the SEAL. I'm the father. And you're going to help me send a message." Rivera broke faster than Felix had. Fear of the unknown was more powerful than physical pain, and I'd become something terrifying in his mind. An invisible predator who could reach him anywhere, anytime. He gave me locations of 3 more safe houses, the names of Kane's remaining lieutenants, and most importantly, the schedule for Kane's weekly protection collections. By the time I was finished with him, I had enough intelligence to dismantle the entire Serpent Kings organization. Rivera's body was found the next morning by homeless scavengers, killed by what appeared to be a rival gang execution. The zip ties and torture marks suggested he'd given up valuable information before dying, which would make Kane paranoid about betrayal within his own ranks. The third kill was purely psychological warfare. Tommy Vega was Kane's enforcer, a sadist who specialized in intimidating families who fell behind on protection payments. He'd been the one to suggest forcing Blake to watch, according to Felix's confession. I didn't make Vega's death look accidental. Instead, I left his body in the middle of Kane's strip club parking lot, arranged in a crucifixion pose with his arms spread wide and his throat cut. Pinned to his chest was a playing card, the Ace of Spades, known in military circles as the death card. No robbery, no attempt to hide the killing. Just a clear message that someone was hunting the Serpent Kings with professional precision. The local news covered it as gang warfare, but Kane would know better. 3 of his men dead in 5 days, each killing more sophisticated than street thugs could manage. The cops were baffled, but Kane would recognize the signature of military training. That night, I called Brooke from an encrypted phone. "Adrian, I saw the news about those gang members. Please tell me you're not involved." I wanted to lie, to protect her from the truth of what her husband had become. But she deserved honesty, even if she couldn't handle all of it. They were part of the crew that hurt our family. There was a long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Are you safe? I'm being careful. And the kids? Are they safe now?" "They will be. Soon." Another pause. "I love you, Adrian. But I'm scared of what you're becoming. I'm becoming what I need to be to protect our family. Nothing more, nothing less. After hanging up, I sat in my surveillance post overlooking Kane's compound, watching through high-powered scopes as extra security flooded the property. He was scared now, bringing in muscle from allied gangs and installing new cameras around his perimeter. But fear makes people sloppy, and Kane was about to make the mistake that would give me the opening I needed. 3 down, 14 to go. The angel of death was just getting started. Kane's paranoia reached a breaking point on the 4th day after Vega's crucifixion. I watched through thermal imaging as he paced his compound's main room like a caged animal, screaming at his remaining lieutenants while armed guards patrolled every entrance. Find out who's doing this. His voice carried across the property as he threw a chair against the wall. 3 of my best men don't just fucking disappear without somebody seeing something. What Kane didn't know was that I'd planted listening devices throughout his compound during my reconnaissance phase. Every conversation, every phone call, every moment of weakness was being recorded and analyzed. His fear was my intelligence goldmine. The breakthrough came during a heated argument between Kane and his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Quinn Reeves who'd served time for armed robbery. "Boss, this isn't random gang shit," Reeves said, his voice tense. "Whoever's doing this knows military tactics." Felix was killed with surgical precision. Rivera was interrogated by someone who knew how to break him without leaving obvious torture marks. And Vega, that crucifixion thing is psychological warfare, meant to terrorize us. You think it's the cops? Some kind of task force? No. Cops don't execute people and arrange bodies like art installations. This is personal. Kane's voice dropped to a whisper, but my surveillance equipment caught every word. The seal. What seal? 3 weeks ago, we hit a family on Maple Street. Protection money collection. The father was some retired Navy SEAL, but he seemed weak. Just stood there while we taught his family a lesson. There was a long pause. I could picture Reeves processing this information, realizing the magnitude of their mistake. "Boss, what exactly did you do to this SEAL's family?" Kane's description of that night made me grip my rifle until my knuckles went white. He talked about violating my daughter like it was a business transaction, laughing about how I'd been too much of a pussy to fight back. "Jesus Christ," Reeves breathed. "Do you know what you've done? Navy SEALs aren't soldiers, they're fucking assassins. And you just gave one of them a personal vendetta. He's retired. He's been playing civilian for months. That doesn't matter. These guys don't retire, they just go dormant. And now you've woken one up." The fear in Kane's voice was music to my ears. "So what do? We disappear. Tonight. Take what cash we can carry and get the fuck out of Colorado before he finds us." But Kane's narcissism wouldn't let him run. "I'm not being chased out of my own territory by one man. I built this empire, and I'm not giving it up." "Then you're going to die." "Maybe. But I'm taking that SEAL bastard with me." That's when Kane made his fatal error. Instead of cutting his losses and fleeing, he decided to double down on violence. He put a $50,000 bounty on my head and sent teams to hunt for me throughout the city. What he didn't understand was that hunting a Navy SEAL in urban terrain was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. I'd spent years teaching soldiers how to disappear in hostile territory, how to live off the grid while eliminating high-value targets. His hunters became my targets. The first team found me in an abandoned warehouse where I deliberately left traces of my presence. For men with military surplus weapons, thinking they were tracking a desperate father on the run. They had no idea they were walking into a kill box I'd spent 6 hours preparing. I took them down with precision shots from concealed positions, each kill designed to look like they'd been ambushed by a superior force. When Kane's reinforcements arrived, they found 4 bodies arranged in tactical positions, suggesting a firefight that never actually happened. The psychological effect was devastating. Word spread through Kane's organization that whoever was hunting them could strike anywhere, anytime, without warning. Men who'd terrorized families for years were now jumping at shadows, and refusing dangerous assignments. But the real terror came when Kane realized I knew everything about his operation. Bank accounts, safe house locations, the names and addresses of corrupt officials on his payroll. I'd been collecting intelligence for weeks, and now I began using it. Anonymous tips led police raids to 3 drug laboratories. Financial records mysteriously appeared in FBI databases, triggering federal investigations. Compromising photos of judges and city councilmen surfaced on social media, destroying Kane's political protection network. In 72 hours, I'd systematically dismantled everything he'd built over 5 years. His empire was crumbling, his men were deserting, and law enforcement was closing in from multiple angles. The final psychological blow came through a burner phone I'd programmed to call Kane's private number every hour on the hour. When he answered, he'd hear 14 seconds of audio from that night at my house. Ivy's screams, Blake's terrified crying, and my own voice begging for their safety. Then silence. After the 5th call, Kane smashed his phone against the wall. But the calls continued to his backup numbers, his lieutenant's phones, even the landline at his mother's nursing home. The sound of what he'd done followed him everywhere, a constant reminder that consequences were coming. He's in my head, Kane screamed during an intercepted conversation with Reeves. This ghost motherfucker is in my fucking head. Then maybe it's time to know. I'm not running from some washed-up soldier playing vigilante. I want this bastard found, and I want him brought to me alive so I can finish what we started with his family. That threat sealed Kane's fate. The moment he mentioned my family again, any possibility of mercy died. This wouldn't end with his death. It would end with his complete destruction as a human being. Through my surveillance network, I watched Kane's compound prepare for siege warfare. Sandbags around windows, armed guards on rotating shifts, enough firepower to hold off a small army. He was turning his home into a fortress, thinking conventional tactics would save him. What Kane still didn't understand was that I wasn't coming for a frontal assault. I was coming to break him psychologically before ending his life, just like he'd tried to break my family. The hunter had become the hunted, and Kane was about to learn why the Angel of Death had earned that nickname in the darkest corners of the world. But first, I had one more message to send. The message I sent Kane wasn't delivered through bullets or bodies this time. It was delivered through his mother. At 83 years old, Elena Kane suffered from advanced dementia, but she still recognized her son during his weekly visits. She was the only person on earth he genuinely cared about, the last connection to whatever humanity he might have once possessed. I didn't hurt her. I'm not a monster. Instead, I arranged for her to receive a visitor on Thursday afternoon, a kind nurse's aide who brought flowers and read to elderly patients. The aide was actually Paige, a former military intelligence operative who specialized in psychological operations. When Kane arrived for his Saturday visit, his mother was waiting with a gift. "Dominic, sweetheart, the nicest young woman brought you something," Elena said, handing him a small wrapped box. "She said she knew you from the old neighborhood." Inside the box was a single photograph, Kane's compound taken from an impossible angle, showing him through his bedroom window 2 nights earlier. Written on the back in precise military lettering were GPS coordinates and a simple message: "I can reach you anywhere." Kane's hands shook as he realized the implications. Someone had been close enough to photograph him in his most secure location, then had waltzed into his mother's nursing home to deliver the evidence. What young woman, Ma? What did she look like? But Elena's dementia had already stolen the memory. What woman, dear? Did you bring me flowers? That night, Kane moved his mother to a private facility with armed security, but the damage was done. I'd proven that his fortress was an illusion, that nowhere was safe, that I could strike at what he loved most whenever I chose. The psychological warfare escalated over the next 72 hours. Kane woke up Monday morning to find his favorite restaurant had been bombed, not with explosives, but with health department violations that shut it down permanently. Anonymous tips had led inspectors to discover evidence of money laundering and tax evasion that would put the owner in federal prison. Tuesday, his luxury car dealership burned to the ground while he slept. The fire marshal ruled it electrical, but Kane found a playing card tucked under his compound's front gate, the ace of spades, slightly singed around the edges. Wednesday, 3 more of his men disappeared. Not killed this time, simply vanished. Their families received anonymous packages containing photos of their loved ones bound and blindfolded, along with instructions to leave Denver within 24 hours or never see them again. All 3 families were on buses out of state before sunset. By Thursday, Kane was operating with half his original crew, and the survivors were questioning every shadow, every sound, every moment of silence. They'd gone from predators to prey, and the transition was destroying their sanity. "He's not human," one of his guards whispered during an intercepted phone call. "Humans can't be everywhere at once. This is some supernatural shit." Kane's breaking point came Friday night during what should have been a routine meeting with his remaining lieutenants. I'd infiltrated his compound sound system and programmed it to play Ivy's screams at random intervals. 30 seconds of audio from that horrible night, echoing through his stronghold like the ghost of his crimes. "Turn it off," Kane screamed, shooting at speakers mounted near the ceiling. "Find the fucking source and turn it off." But there was no source to find. The audio was transmitted from multiple locations, bounced off cell towers and satellite relays in patterns his technicians couldn't trace. Every time they thought they'd stopped it, the screams would start again from a different speaker. By midnight, Kane was huddled in his bedroom with a bottle of whiskey and a loaded shotgun, flinching every time the building settled or the wind moved through the trees. The man who'd terrorized an entire neighborhood was now terrified of sounds in the dark. "Come out and face me," he shouted at empty rooms. "Stop hiding like a coward and face me like a man." I was watching through thermal imaging from 300 yards away, seeing his heat signature pace frantically through rooms that had become his prison. The psychological breakdown was accelerating exactly as I'd planned. The final psychological blow came Saturday morning. Kane woke to find every mirror in his compound had been replaced overnight with photographs of his victims, not just Ivy, but all the families he'd destroyed over the years. Dozens of faces staring back at him with accusation in their eyes. In the center of his bathroom mirror was a photo of my daughter on the night she was attacked, bruised and broken, with a message written in red marker. They all had fathers too. Kane put his fist through that mirror, screaming until his voice cracked. Glass shards cut his knuckles, but the pain was nothing compared to the realization that his sins had finally found him. "What do you want?" he screamed at the empty compound. "Money? Territory? Just tell me what you fucking want." I activated the intercom system I'd installed during my surveillance phase, my voice echoing through every room like the judgment of an angry god. "I want you to understand what you took from my family. I want you to feel the fear those children felt. And when you're broken and begging, I want you to remember that this is justice." Kane grabbed his shotgun and fired randomly at the ceiling, the walls, anywhere he thought speakers might be hidden. But my voice continued, calm and measured and inevitable. "Tomorrow night, Dominic. Come alone to the warehouse district, coordinates 39.7392 degrees north, 104.9903 degrees west. Come armed, come afraid, come ready to pay for what you did to my daughter. And if I don't, then I'll visit your mother again. And this time, I won't be so polite." The line went dead, leaving Kane alone with his terror and the sound of his own ragged breathing. The trap was set. Tomorrow night, the angel of death would finally meet the monster who destroyed his family. Kane arrived at the warehouse coordinates 90 minutes early, bringing 12 of his remaining men and enough firepower to level a city block. They'd positioned snipers on surrounding rooftops, established perimeters at every possible entrance, and wired the entire area with motion sensors and infrared cameras. What they didn't know was that I'd been living in those warehouses for the past week, turning the entire district into my personal kill zone. I watched through night vision scopes as Kane's team deployed with amateur precision, thinking they were setting an ambush for a desperate father. They had no understanding of how special operations worked, no concept of what it meant to face someone who'd spent 15 years perfecting urban warfare. Spread out. Kane ordered through radio communications. I was intercepting in real time. This bastard shows up. We light him up from every direction. No games, no talking. Just put him down and walk away. But Kane couldn't help himself. As the hours passed and nothing happened, his paranoia began eating away at his tactical discipline. He started second-guessing positions, moving his men around like chess pieces, creating exactly the kind of confusion I'd been counting on. At 11:30 p.m., I made my presence known. A single rifle shot echoed through the warehouse district, not aimed at any of Kane's men, but at a stack of oil drums I'd positioned 3 blocks away. The explosion lit up the night sky like a small sunrise, drawing every eye toward the distant fireball. In that moment of distraction, I eliminated the sniper on the eastern rooftop with a suppressed headshot from 800 yards. His body tumbled from the building and landed in the alley below with a wet thud that his teammates couldn't hear over their own radio chatter. What the fuck was that explosion? Kane's voice crackled with panic. Reeves, report. Did anybody see where that shot came from? But Reeves was already dead, taken down by a throwing knife to the throat as he moved between cover positions. I'd learned blade combat from Korean War veterans who'd perfected silent killing in frozen mountains, and those skills were serving me well in the urban jungle. Kane's remaining men began falling one by one, picked off with surgical precision from angles they couldn't anticipate or defend against. I moved through the warehouse shadows like death itself, using maintenance tunnels and ventilation systems they didn't even know existed. Each kill was designed for maximum psychological impact. Bodies arranged in specific positions, weapons removed and placed just out of reach, tactical gear stripped away to leave them looking vulnerable and defeated. Kane's radio filled with increasingly frantic calls from positions that would never answer again. Hunter team, respond. Logan, where the fuck are you? Somebody give me a goddamn status report. By midnight, Kane was alone in the central warehouse, spinning in circles with a pistol in each hand, firing at shadows and echoes. His tactical vest was soaked with sweat despite the cold October air, and his breathing sounded like a drowning man gasping for oxygen. I know you're in here, he screamed into the darkness. Come out and face me, you coward. I materialized from the shadows 20 feet behind him, close enough to smell his fierce sweat, silent as a hunting cat. When I spoke, my voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Turn around, Dominic. He spun wildly, both pistols tracking toward my voice, but I'd already moved. The warehouse's acoustics made my words bounce off steel walls and concrete floors, creating an auditory maze that destroyed his spatial awareness. 3 weeks ago, you thought you were teaching my family a lesson. I continued, my voice seeming to shift locations with each sentence. Tonight, school is back in session. Kane fired randomly into the darkness, muzzle flashes illuminating his terrified face in brief, stroboscopic moments. 12 rounds, 18, 24. When his weapons clicked empty, the silence was deafening. Reload, I suggested helpfully. His hands shook as he fumbled for fresh magazines, dropping one that clattered across the concrete floor like a small metallic animal scurrying for cover. The sound echoed for what seemed like minutes, each reverberation amplifying his psychological breakdown. You want to know something interesting about your operation, Kane? I asked while he struggled to reload. I found your books. All those families you've terrorized. All those children you've traumatized. 14 girls under 18. The youngest was 13. That's business. Nothing personal. It became personal when you touched my daughter. I stepped into the light then, emerging from behind a steel support beam like a nightmare made flesh. Full tactical gear, night vision goggles pushed up to reveal cold blue eyes, suppressed rifle held with casual confidence. Every inch the professional killer Kane had awakened. Jesus Christ, he whispered, both pistols trembling in his grip. You're really him. The angel of death. I'm a father whose family you destroyed. Everything else is just training. Kane raised his weapons, but his hands were shaking too badly for accurate aim. I can end this right now. One shot, and you're dead. You had 12 men with you tonight. Where are they now? The question hit Kane like a physical blow as he realized he was completely alone, surrounded by the bodies of his crew, facing an enemy who'd eliminated trained killers without taking a scratch. What? What do you want? I want you to understand what you are. You're not a gang leader or a businessman or a survivor. You're a rabid animal that needs to be put down for the safety of innocent people. I can pay you. Whatever you want. Money, territory, connections. I've got judges and cops on my payroll. We can work something out. I shook my head slowly. There's no negotiating with cancer, Dominic. There's only cutting it out. Kane's breaking point finally arrived. Years of violence and intimidation had convinced him he was apex predator, but now he faced something from a different evolutionary chain entirely. His bravado crumbled, revealing the coward underneath. Please, he whimpered. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about your daughter. It wasn't supposed to. I mean, it was just business. Business. My voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire warehouse. You raped my 17-year-old daughter while forcing my 12-year-old son to watch, and you call that business? The trap was complete. Kane was broken, isolated, and terrified. Now came the final lesson. The warehouse fell silent except for Kane's ragged breathing and the distant sound of sirens responding to the explosion I'd triggered hours earlier. They were still blocks away, giving me all the time I needed for what came next. Kane stood frozen in the center of the kill zone, both pistols aimed at me with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 20 feet separated us, close enough for conversation, far enough that his panic wouldn't make him accidentally dangerous. You know what the hardest part of my job was in Afghanistan? I asked, keeping my rifle trained on his center mass. It wasn't the killing. Any fool with a weapon can kill. The hardest part was deciding who deserved to live. I deserve to live, Kane stammered. I've got information you need. Names, locations, connections to bigger players. Kill me, and you'll never get them all. I already have all your files, Dominic. Your computers, your safe deposit boxes, your offshore accounts. I've spent weeks downloading your entire operation. The FBI will have everything by morning. His face went white as he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. Then what do you want? I want you to feel what my daughter felt that night. Helpless, terrified, knowing that something horrible was about to happen and being powerless to stop it. Kane's tactical vest was equipped with a body camera, standard gear for gang operations to record intimidation tactics. I'd known he would be wearing it, counted on it. What he didn't know was that I'd hacked into the feed hours ago. Smile for the camera, Dominic. Your death is being broadcast live to every computer in your organization. All your remaining men, all your contacts, everyone who ever feared the Serpent Kings is watching you cower like a child. Kane glanced down at the blinking red light on his chest, then back at me with growing horror. You're insane. I'm thorough. When word spreads that the mighty Dominic Kane died begging for mercy, your entire legacy crumbles. No one will fear your name. No one will avenge your death. You'll be remembered as the coward who broke when he finally met a real killer. The psychological torture was more devastating than any physical pain I could have inflicted. Kane's whole identity was built on being feared, on being the apex predator in his territory. Now his final moments would be preserved forever as evidence of his cowardice. Please, he whispered, both pistols lowering slightly. I have a mother. She's old and sick. If something happens to me, she'll die alone in that nursing home. Your mother raised a monster. But she's innocent, so she'll be protected. The men I have watching her will make sure she's comfortable for whatever time she has left. Kane's weapons dropped completely as the full scope of my preparation became clear. You've thought of everything. I had 3 weeks to plan while my daughter couldn't sleep without nightmares, and my son flinched every time someone raised their voice. 3 weeks to imagine exactly how this moment would unfold. I reached into my tactical vest and pulled out a photograph, the same picture I'd left in his mirror, showing Ivy bruised and broken on that horrible night. Look at her, I commanded, tossing the photo at his feet. Look at what you did to an innocent 17-year-old girl who never hurt anyone in her life. Kane glanced down at the image and immediately looked away, but I wasn't finished. I said, look at her. My voice echoed through the warehouse like thunder. You made my son watch while you destroyed his sister. You can damn well look at what you did. Tears were streaming down Kane's face now, not from guilt or remorse, but from pure terror at what was coming. I can't look at that. Then you're even more pathetic than I thought. You can commit the crime, but you can't face the evidence. I stepped closer, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead, close enough to smell the fear radiating from his pores. Here's what's going to happen, Dominic. I'm going to give you the same choice you gave my family that night. You can die quick and clean, or you can die slow and screaming. The only difference is that this time, the victim gets to choose. Kane's knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the concrete floor, still clutching his useless pistols. I choose quick. Please, just make it quick. That's not how this works. See, my daughter didn't get to choose what happened to her. My son didn't get to choose what he was forced to witness. So you don't get to choose either. I pulled out a military-issue tactical knife, the same model I'd used on his lieutenants. The blade caught the warehouse's fluorescent lighting and threw harsh shadows across Kane's terrified face. Adrian Cross, he said my name like a prayer. Please, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. There's nothing you can do now. You had your chance to be human 3 weeks ago when you chose to destroy my family. You made your choice. Now you live with the consequences. I raised the knife, and Kane closed his eyes, whimpering like a wounded animal. But the killing blow never came. Instead, I lowered the weapon and stepped back, watching as confusion replaced terror in his expression. Actually, Dominic, there is something worse than death for a man like you. Kane opened his eyes, hope flickering briefly before being crushed by the cold calculation in my voice. Prison, federal prison, where your reputation means nothing and child rapists get exactly the treatment they deserve from other inmates. The sirens were getting closer now, right on schedule. You see, while you were cowering in your compound, I was working with some very patient federal agents. They have everything now, financial records, witness testimony, video evidence of your crimes against children. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a 6x8 cell, and every single day you'll remember that the angel of death put you there. Kane's despair was beautiful to witness. Death would have been mercy. Federal prison was eternal punishment. The warehouse doors exploded inward as FBI tactical teams flooded the building, weapons drawn, moving with military precision toward our position. Adrian Cross, the team leader, called out, "Step away from the suspect and drop your weapons." I complied immediately, placing my rifle on the ground and raising my hands. The deal I'd made with federal authorities was specific: Kane alive and their most wanted child trafficker in custody. As they zip-tied Kane and read him his rights, he looked at me with the broken eyes of a man who finally understood that actions have consequences. "This isn't over," he whispered as they dragged him toward the exit. "Yes, it is," I replied. "You just don't know it yet." 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Dominic Kane shuffle into the courtroom wearing orange prison coveralls and ankle shackles. The man who'd once terrorized an entire neighborhood now looked like what he'd always been underneath the bravado: a broken, pathetic coward. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Judge Natalie Morrison, had built an airtight case using the intelligence I'd gathered during my hunt. financial records, surveillance footage, witness testimony from Kane's surviving victims. Everything needed to ensure he'd never see freedom again. Mr. Kane, Judge Morrison addressed him with cold professionalism. You've been found guilty on 43 counts, including racketeering, human trafficking, sexual assault of minors, and conspiracy to commit murder. Do you have anything to say before sentencing? Kane looked up from the defendant's table, his eyes scanning the packed courtroom until they found mine. For a moment, the old rage flickered in his expression, the same predatory hatred I'd seen that night in my living room. But prison had already begun its work on him. His face was marked with fresh scars from fights he'd lost, his once muscular frame diminished by constant fear and poor nutrition. The other inmates had recognized what he was and delivered their own form of justice. I got nothing to say, he mumbled, looking back down at his shackled hands. Then I'll say something, Judge Morrison replied, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. In 30 years on this bench, I've never seen such a systematic campaign of terror against innocent families. You didn't just commit crimes, Mr. Kane. You declared war on the concept of safety itself. She paused, letting the words sink in while Kane stared at the floor. The evidence shows you personally assaulted 14 minor victims, the youngest being 13 years old. You forced family members to witness these attacks as a form of psychological torture. You built an entire criminal empire on the foundation of sexual violence and fear. I felt Brooke's hand squeeze mine as we sat in the gallery. She'd insisted on attending the sentencing, needing to see justice delivered with her own eyes. Blake and Ivy were at home with counselors, still working through their trauma, but finally beginning to heal. Therefore, Judge Morrison continued, I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole, to be served in maximum security isolation for your own protection. Kane's head snapped up at those last words. Isolation meant 23 hours a day in a concrete box, no human contact except for guards who'd been briefed on his crimes. It was a living death sentence worse than any execution. Additionally, the judge added, I'm ordering the forfeiture of all assets connected to your criminal enterprise. This includes properties, vehicles, business interests, and financial accounts totaling approximately $3.2 million. The money would go to Kane's victims, families like mine who'd lost everything to his reign of terror. It wouldn't undo the damage, but it would help with medical bills, therapy costs, and rebuilding shattered lives. As the bailiffs prepared to escort Kane back to his cell, he turned one final time toward the gallery. His eyes found mine across the crowded courtroom, and I saw something that surprised me. Not hatred or defiance, but broken recognition. He understood now that Adrian Cross hadn't just been a random victim who got lucky. I'd been a predator hunting another predator, using skills and resources he couldn't comprehend or counter. The angel of death had chosen him for elimination, and no amount of money, muscle, or political connections could have saved him. Take him away, Judge Morrison ordered with finality. As Kane shuffled toward the exit in his chains, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not satisfaction or vengeance, but the quiet calm that comes when justice has been properly served. Outside the courthouse, Federal Prosecutor Quinn Matthews pulled me aside for a private conversation. The intelligence you provided was instrumental in building this case, she said. Officially, the FBI can't condone vigilante actions. Unofficially, Kane's organization would still be operating if you hadn't dismantled it. I was just protecting my family. You were doing what the system couldn't. Sometimes that's necessary, even if we can't say so publicly. She handed me a sealed envelope. Kane's associates who escaped Colorado have been tracked down by federal task forces. The Serpent Kings are finished as an organization. Your family is safe. That evening, I called Ivy from the hotel where Brooke and I were staying. She was doing better, still in therapy, still having difficult days, but slowly reclaiming her life from the nightmare Kane had created. Dad, how did the sentencing go? It's over, Princess. He's never getting out of prison. There was a long pause before she spoke again. Good. I know it won't fix everything, but good. How are you feeling? Different. Stronger, maybe? Like I survived something that was supposed to break me, but it didn't. That strength in her voice was worth more than any revenge I could have taken. Ivy was going to be okay. They both were. Blake got on the phone next, his 12-year-old voice more serious than any child should be. Dad, did you really hunt down all the bad guys like in your war stories? I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have to do difficult things to protect their families. But the important thing is that you and your sister are safe now. Are you coming home soon? Tomorrow. And we're never going to be separated like that again. The next morning, as Brooke and I drove back to Colorado Springs, she asked the question I'd been expecting. Was it worth it? Everything you did to catch Kane. I thought about Ivy's newfound strength, Blake's returning laughter, the 14 other families who would never be terrorized again. I thought about Kane spending the next 30 years in solitary confinement, finally understanding what helplessness felt like. Yes, it was worth it. And you can live with what you had to become. I became what I needed to be to protect our children. Nothing more, nothing less. Kane had made the mistake of attacking a family without knowing who the father really was. The angel of death had taught him that some sins carry consequences that echo through eternity. Justice had been served, cold and complete. 1 year later, I stood in our new backyard watching Blake teach his neighborhood friends how to throw a proper spiral. At 13, he'd grown 3 inches and gained the confidence that comes from knowing his father had kept his promise to protect the family. Ivy was inside getting ready for her senior prom. The same silver dress she'd picked out before our world fell apart. The boy who'd asked her was named Quentin, a kind kid from her AP chemistry class who treated her with the respect she deserved. Dad, can you help me with this necklace? She called from upstairs. When I walked into her room, I saw the young woman she'd become despite everything Kane had tried to destroy. Stronger, wiser, with eyes that had seen darkness but chosen light anyway. You look beautiful, princess. Thanks. And Dad, I wanted to tell you something. I fastened the clasp around her neck, meeting her eyes in the vanity mirror. I forgive you, she said quietly, for that night, for not being able to stop what happened. I understand now that you saved Blake's life by not fighting back. The words hit me harder than any enemy fire I'd faced in combat. For a year, I'd carried the guilt of watching helplessly while my daughter was violated. Her forgiveness meant more than Kane's imprisonment, more than all the lives I'd saved by eliminating his organization. I love you, Ivy, and I'm proud of the woman you've become. I love you too, Dad, and I'm proud you're my father. Brooke appeared in the doorway, radiant in the kind of smile I hadn't seen since before the attack. Our marriage had been tested by fire, but we'd emerged stronger on the other side. The limo's here, she announced, and Quentin looks terrified. We walked Ivy downstairs together, the 3 of us plus Blake creating the family unit Kane had tried to destroy but had only made more resilient. Quentin was indeed nervous, fumbling with a corsage while Blake critiqued his technique with brotherly authority. After they left for prom, our family settled into the quiet evening routine we'd rebuilt from scratch. Blake worked on homework while Brooke and I shared a bottle of wine on the porch, watching sunset paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Any regrets? She asked, the question she'd been holding back for months. About Kane? None. He got exactly what he deserved. I meant about the methods, the things you had to become. I considered her words while watching our son play with neighborhood kids who saw him as just another military brat, not a trauma survivor. These children felt safe because predators like Kane were no longer hunting in our community. The angel of death was always part of who I am, I said finally. I just hoped I'd never need him again. But when someone threatens my family, I'll use every skill I have to protect what matters most. And now he's dormant again, hopefully forever. But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. There would always be evil in the world, and sometimes good men would need to make hard choices to stop it. The difference now was that my children understood their father wasn't helpless. He was strategic, patient, and absolutely lethal when necessary. The phone rang around 10 p.m. Blake answered it with teenage casualness, then handed it to me with a confused expression. "Dad, it's someone from the VA hospital. They want to talk to you about some kind of program." The caller was Dr. Paige Harrison, a military psychologist who ran therapy groups for combat veterans struggling with civilian life. "Mr. Cross, I've heard about your situation through channels. We have other fathers here dealing with similar trauma, family violence, feeling helpless to protect loved ones. Would you consider sharing your story with them?" "What kind of story?" "The real one. How a trained warrior learned to be a protective father without losing himself to darkness. How justice and vengeance can be channeled constructively." I looked through the window at Blake, who was building another tactical Lego fortress, and thought about the men who might benefit from understanding that strength and restraint weren't opposites. "I'll think about it. These men need to know that surviving trauma doesn't mean surrendering your ability to fight back. Sometimes they need to hear from someone who found the balance." After hanging up, I realized that Kane's greatest failure hadn't been underestimating my military training. It had been misunderstanding what motivates a father. He'd thought violence would break our family's spirit, but instead it had revealed how strong we really were. Late that night, after Ivy returned home glowing with prom memories and Blake had fallen asleep reading military history, I sat at my desk writing in the journal my therapist had recommended. The entry read, "Today marks 365 days since we reclaimed our lives from evil. My daughter danced at her prom. My son taught his friends football tactics. My wife smiled without shadows in her eyes. Dominic Kane is spending his 365th night in solitary confinement, and will spend roughly 10,000 more before he dies alone and forgotten. Justice served, family protected, mission accomplished." I closed the journal and looked at the framed photo on my desk. All four of us at Blake's championship game last month, arms around each other, faces bright with genuine happiness. Kane had tried to teach us fear. Instead, he taught us that love is worth fighting for, that families can heal from anything, and that sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become something more dangerous. The angel of death was sleeping again, but he'd wake up if needed. Because that's what fathers do, whatever it takes to keep their children safe. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey of justice